So one of my favorite ways to get herbs growing without actually having to get them going from seed or as much from seed, because sometimes herbs can be a little bit fussy from seed. Some are okay, but others maybe are a little more challenging, like oregano and thyme sometimes don't want to cooperate as well. So there's a couple things you can do. So if you have a plant already growing inside, whether you had started it from seed or whether you bought it from a greenhouse, you can take cuttings off of it. Or like this big bunch of mint, this is from the grocery store, so you can get like those, like the little bundle of herbs that you would buy to put in your meal, and just literally you're going to cut, or well, trim off any of the icky ends and then get rid of all the leaves and just stick it in a glass of water, and you can see there is tons of roots that have started to grow themselves on this one. Basil is really super easy, exact same. You can see there's loads of roots happening here. And just remove all the leaves, anything that's gonna sit in the water. And then I've got also thyme and oregano happening in this jar. And essentially the same thing, just the one with these guys. The older the plant is, it'll get like that woody bark, of the like perennial. Don't take cuttings from any of like the really woody parts. They just don't tend to want to put out roots, so you're gonna have a much harder time. So if you can get just like the new little like pop-ups, like the new shoots, and then cut those, trim any leaves off, because if you stick leaves into your water, it's just gonna rot on you. So just clean it all off, keep a little bit on top, and stick it somewhere sunny. You do need to be careful that they don't keep drying out. Like make sure you do keep it really, really topped up, just because if it dries out, your roots are gonna die, and this is a pretty delicate situation. But it's kind of the same with any water propagation, pretty straightforward. Like right now, these guys are ready to be put in some dirt, and I'm just gonna keep doing the same thing because this is way easier than starting it from seed. Plus it kind of clears up a little bit of space on my seed growing shelf. I can just like get this going right away, like, on a sunny windowsill. So it's pretty easy that way. And I will show you what it looks like when I start to actually pot them up.
So I'm potting them up with just standard potting soil mix. I've also added some worm castings to it as well, just because they're going to be in these pots for a little while before they end up outside. And I find it much easier to make sure that I've got a lot of nutrients in the soil than worrying about a bunch of extra fertilizing. I just find it, for my own management of all the things I have going on, the best route. So when you are potting up anything that you've water propagated, so you've got the roots started in water, you want to just make sure that you're being maybe a little bit more gentle with the pressure. I just really am only packing it in there enough that I can get the plant to stand up, and that's kind of it. It may settle later and I'll have to add more later, and that's not a big deal, but I always just like to try and be a little bit more gentle with it if I can. So the one thing I'd probably do differently next time is I started thyme and oregano together in the same jar, and even though there's not a lot of roots there, they actually were somewhat tangled, so I just kind of had to gingerly kind of separate them without ripping any off, so that I had my little bundle of oregano and then also my little bundle of thyme to stick in their own respective pots. You can do the same thing as well with rosemary. I just didn't have any going to water propagate right now, but once I do, I'm going to do the same, because I find this just to be so much quicker to get more herbs going, and I'm a big fan of lots of herbs. Now, one thing that I kind of did here is I buried it really deep in the soil, as much as I could, just with basically the leaves sticking out the top, and I kind of almost folded it over itself, like doubled it back through the pot, so that there was lots of stem and roots buried in the soil, because both thyme, oregano, and also rosemary will put out extra roots if they're connecting to the soil. So I'm using this just to build a really great root structure for my future plants. And that's just kind of one little trick. You'll see them, if they're sitting in the soil outside and sort of laying across the ground, they'll put out roots and try and, get bigger in that respect. So we can kind of cheat a little bit and use that here. Also, if you do end up with, say, leggy thyme, that's a little trick. You can just kind of bury it a little bit deeper, and that legginess, it'll just start to put out more roots up the stem. They're kind of an easier one for that. So just gently tuck it in there, give it a little bit of water. I've put them in maybe slightly larger pots than might be ideal, but I know, at least for my own way that I care for my plants, I usually tend to underwater, a little more on the neglect side of things. So that is what I have opted to do. You may want to stick for a little bit smaller if you like to water a lot and you know that you maybe kill plants from overwatering, but that's what I've decided. And you'll notice this here, this pot is really quite large. This is what I'm going to be sticking the mint into, partially because I do have a pretty good sized bundle of mint, and also because mint is, it's one of those plants that really likes to take off. Like in the past, I've actually had mint choke itself out in a pot. It just grew that big that quickly. So I'm trying to just get ahead of it here and hopes that this will be enough for me to be able to get it out into my garden without having to upgrade again. I think it should be just fine. But being just cautious when you're watering until it starts to take up water a little bit quicker, you want to be delicate with it.